News Radio 700 WLW.
The consumer price index rose 7.5% in January. That's the biggest rise in inflation since the early 80s. So when you went out and bought your Bengals gear, your hats, your scarves, your gloves, your coats, your T-shirts, your pants, your sweats, your socks, your underwear, your bras, et cetera, you may know the price has gone up. And in some cases, especially when it comes to things like groceries, you're out buying your wings and getting your beer. You're looking at it going, well, maybe I'm not really feeling the full impact of this thing yet. And there's a reason why, because companies are very shrewd at trying to pass along cost to us, the consumer, which is the model. That's the way it always is. They get a cost, they're going to pass it on to us. That certainly things like hidden fees are baked in there. If you're looking at airline flights, remember the old gas fees back in the day, gas and fuel were high. We got to put a surcharge on, stuff like that. Well, when it comes to commodities, what they're doing is decreasing the size of packaging. Nothing new there. It's called shrinkflation, and that's just downsizing a product without changing the price. Lisa W. Miller is a consumer psychology strategist for LWM Associates. That's her company, and joins me to talk about the psychology of all this on the show this morning. Lisa, hi. How you doing?
Good morning, Scott.
So typically we don't really read the box, right? We buy the products. If you're to look at the psychology of a common shopper, generally we buy the stuff we're familiar with, right? We take it, we throw it in the cart, and we move on. We really don't notice that the box itself or the package or maybe the little bag inside that box is shrunk.
No, that is so true. And it's just a funny name is shrinkflation. And absolutely, it is something that consumer packaged goods companies have used for decades. But what happens is you might be, let's say, making a recipe and it calls for a can of tuna, and then it calls for a 7-ounce can of tuna, and then you go to your pantry and it's actually a 5-ounce can of tuna, and you're like, what happened? Mm-hmm. And so a lot of times it'll just happen gradually, just, over, honestly, sometimes years it can happen, but it's just waiting out the package and charging the same price. And so it's another way that inflation strikes us. Right. But what's interesting is the government doesn't always track that in the inflation prices because it's the same UPC code, it's the same price. And so it doesn't really necessarily track that type of cost increases.
Want to look at this and go, okay, well, companies are doing this. They're shrinking the size of the package. I'm kind of getting screwed here because I'm paying the same, but I'm getting less. So my dollar goes. That's really not the fault of the company, though. Because we are reluctant if, for example, that can of tuna that's now 4 ounces, if the price of that went up 20%, we'd probably not buy that can of tuna. So in order for us to keep buying the product, they shrink it. I guess it's not the most open, honest thing. They'd put a label, hey, by the way, our package has shrunk 20%. No one's going to do that. But in order to recoup their costs because of inflation, because of the economics of it, is they do this. And it's looked at as like some sort of nefarious, diabolical thing. You know what? I don't really see it that way.
Well, I totally agree with you, Scott, because, in fact, I actually used to work almost 10 years. I worked at Frito Lay, and this was, in the late 90s, early 2000s. And it's just part of how consumer companies have to deal with inflation. And they would rather keep, from a pricing perspective, people have a certain amount of dollars in their pocket. And so it's a way to actually, pass along those costs without having to really, have the shock of a huge price increase. So, like I said, it has been around for a while. I think the thing that's a little bit difficult in this particular time is that just given inflation costs in general, I've been tracking COVID sentiment, as you know, since the beginning of the pandemic. And right now, basically 43% of Americans in my January survey basically said that they're living paycheck to paycheck. Wow. And that's actually up 10 points from October. And so it's just, prices are going up and the amount of money in people's pockets is going down. And so that is just not a good equation, for the economy right now.
Part of this, too, is the fact that we saw wages increase because of COVID, right? Is that, remember, it wasn't long ago where, and those are generally union organizers in bigger cities, would have the fight for 15 for McDonald's workers to get $15 an hour minimum wage. If they can't feed a family, $15 an hour. And the mindset was, okay, if you get 15 then, McDonald's is simply going to raise the price of their food. Does that really solve the issue? And, of course, that's what happened. I mean, heck, some fast food places are paying you in excess of $15 an hour now. And yet we're seeing what you just described, and that is the working man and the working woman can't keep up. So that seems to be true. We rose wages, and therefore the product price has to go up too.
Right. And I think I intended consequence, but it really is kind of perfectly predictable to your comments earlier, is that, supply chain, product availability, labor costs, those are all things that are going up. And so it was a little perfectly predictable that, companies still have to make a profit. So they're going to have to pass those costs along. But the other thing is, too, is that, 60% of Americans from that same study basically are saying now prices are so high that it's the challenge to go out to eat now. It's the challenge to go do some of those fun activities just because it's so expensive. So it's hitting not only shrinkflation, but it's hitting on a lot of fronts right now. Yeah,
it's such an interesting conversation, too. Lisa W. Miller is a consumer psychology consumer strategist with LWM Associates. That's her company. Talking about shrinkflation, which basically is downsizing a product without changing its price. You go to the store, you buy a package of chips. That package of chips is going to be a couple ounces shorter, less than what it was before, and they're hoping you don't notice. Some say it's treacherous and trickier. I think it's smart business. Now, look at it this way. If I go to, Speedway, and I said, and I need a Snickers. They got the regular size Snickers, and then they got like the double pack of Snickers. The double pack's going to cost me more. I'm basically paying for what the amount of material that I'm getting. In this case, it's a Snickers bar. People don't look at that and go, or a bottle of pop, right? I can get a 16-ounce bottle, or I can get the big, 24-ounce bottle. Well, the 24 is going to cost me more because there's more in there. If there's less, it's less cost. This is the same thing, and I can see why people are upset because we don't pay attention. But again, that's on the consumer. I don't think that's on the company.
Right. It's just everything costs something, right? And so if the companies are just having those rising labor costs, it's difficult to get the commodities that they need. Yeah, it's smart business for them to pass it along. So I think there are a lot of negative headlines around this, shrinkflation. But again, this is something that has been going around. It's been going on for decades, and people companies take weight out of their product. The other thing that could happen too, though, is that I'll tell you a funny story. I have this recipe. It's homemade toffee, and it actually uses saltine crackers. It's a really funny story that one sleeve of crackers used to fill up my cookie sheet, and now it doesn't. So it's one of those things that over the years, it just, it's now a smaller sleeve, and the crackers are smaller, and it costs about the same. So again, it's nothing nefarious to your point. It's just it's cost of doing business. Yeah,
and those packages are going to reflect that too. But then there comes a breaking point too. How much smaller can they get? I think there's a bigger thing here too. By the way, Lisa, making toffee out of saltine crackers. Were you in prison? What are you doing? Is that like when they're making toilet hooch or something like that? I thought it was basically it's molasses and caramelized sugar and a little flour, isn't it?
Okay, I am going to pass along. I'm going to text you this recipe, Scott. For 30 years, I've been making it, and people are so addicted to it. It's crackers, brown sugar, and butter, and then chocolate and pecans on the top. I'm going to text it to you.
All right, send it to me, Lisa.
Delicious.
All right, I don't know. Saltines, it's like, I don't know if you're doing time in Rikers Island. I don't know what's going on there, but making your toffee on a radiator, I'm not sure. But it's delicious, I'm sure.
It is delicious.
So, Lisa, as far as fighting back goes, though, I mean, it's really, I sound like John Matarese and don't waste your money over here, but, you're going to this, that the packages are going to shrink. I bought some chips out of the vending machine last week, and I opened it up, Doritos, and there was one Dorito in this bag. It was incredible. Was I mad? Yeah, a little bit, because I needed to go buy 3 more bags in order to get my Dorito on. Nonetheless, I would say trying maybe generics would be a good idea, because I know that Kroger does a great job with their private selection. That's their generic, and it's probably the same. It's probably the same tuna fish I'm getting from Sunkist or Starkist or whatever it is.
You're definitely right. Is that what consumers can do is when you look at that price per ounce at the shelf, that's really the best way to compare, a private store brand to a national brand. And consumers can make choices. And during kind of inflationary times, a lot of times that is when consumers will pull for those private label, great value brands or Kroger store brands and, be able to see if those qualities meet their expectations. But looking at that price per ounce is definitely a good way to do it or look at the actual ounce weight But there are things consumers can do at the shelf to make sure that they're at least aware of what's going on.
Does this undermine the brand loyalty? Now, here, as you know, Lisa, being a consumer psychology strategist, you know that we're the home of Procter & Gamble brands, and P&G is always on top of this kind of stuff. Does that undermine the loyalty you might have with a P&G product, for example?
I think people go, there's certain categories that, I'll just mention the Doritos. If you want Doritos, you're going to buy Doritos. If you want that Snickers bar, you're going to have that Snickers bar. But I think some of the commodity items like paper goods and cleaning products, those types of things, they're going to have a little bit more price sensitivity where people are going to say, okay, let me go ahead and just try this different brand. And if they like it, then they might actually walk away from the brand that they've been using for a while. But that product expectation, consumers have high expectations when they buy products.
Right.
But it will encourage people to try different products when you have these inflationary times.
Some of the stuff you'll probably notice, right? You open a box of cereal, for example, and that bag is like, wow, man, the bag's smaller than the box, and then there's 3 feet of air in the bag, and then there's 4 cornflakes in there. This is interesting. Like, I'm looking at the list here. I'll read these a couple of these after you're gone. What was it? Oh, Puffs tissues. They go from 56 count to 48 count. So 8 tissues later, you're short 8 tissues, which saves them money, keep the price the same. I don't think you'd ever notice, though, would you?
No, I think something like that. The Puff tissues, you don't. But like a Haagen-Dazs, that was the other one, 16 ounces, now 14 ounces. But do you remember the days that ice cream used to be a half gallon? And now I'm in Texas, and, Bluebell ice cream is still a half gallon. But now a lot of them, those packages keep getting smaller and smaller. But it happens over time, so you don't necessarily notice it.
Let me tell you the biggest ripoff. It's been going on for a long time, longer than me and you combined have been on this earth, Lisa. And that's my other, what else I do is remodeling and that kind of work too. And 2x4s, right? Lumber, dimensional lumber. The 2x4s aren't 2x4. Everyone knows who's worked with that stuff that there's considerably less lumber in a 2x4. That's the dimensional lumber, 2x4. A 2, which is the width of the board, is actually 1.5 inches.
Oh, my goodness, that's so funny. We're doing some remodeling. We're doing some remodeling. I did not even know that.
Didn't you know that?
No, that's interesting. Yeah, good to know.
Sheet goods are the same, but when it comes to dimensional lumber, same thing. It's like, it's a 1/2 inch here, 3.5, and that's the width. It's not even 2x4. So you're getting screwed out a whole bunch of lumber there that those trees owe you some money, Lisa. Keep that in mind.
Oh, my goodness.
That's how they get you.
I got to shake the money.
I never hear any, but it's been that way like forever, I think so. Longer than we've been here. I don't know why that is. I don't know why I just pointed that out. So in addition to maybe buying some off-brand, some off-label stuff and shopping around, I guess the other thing, too, is, saving money. I always said this when we talk about, the issue like welfare and dependence on the public system and how much stuff costs and food deserts is simply if you bought fresh food and there's a demand for fresh food instead of processed food, that's going to save you a whole hell of a lot of money. I mean, if you're really, really hard up, you could go, hey, look, instead of buying French fries that are ready to go, I could actually buy the potatoes and make them myself. That's saving myself a lot of money.
Absolutely. Yeah. Anytime you can shop the perimeter of the store, as the saying goes, where it's fresh products and things like that, it's always going to be a lot less money. $25, $30 can go a very long way when you're buying those fresh vegetables and fruits and so on, and even just meat and preparing it yourself versus buying the already prepared foods in the frozen shelf or the canned aisle. So without a doubt, that's also a way.
When the recession ends, and recessions always end, depressions may begin, but the good times are here. The good times go cycle of the markets. When this occurs, do we see these products then going back to their full size again? Because this has happened in the past. As I said, it's nothing new. Will we see those 8 sheets of puff tissues come back? Will we see the 4 ounces of ragu spaghetti sauce that's missing come back?
No, the sad thing about that is once those weight outs happen, they typically do not go back. What they might do is they might add the family pack, or they might add, the extra large size. So they never kind of bring it back in so many terms, but they might bring back a larger family pack or something like that. That would be the way that they actually do it. Instead of adding, ounces to a current pack, they just kind of create a new pack. And that might be bringing back a package from 10 years ago,
How is that possible, too, when they change the product size? Because I heard during the COVID, strain on COVID and the supply chain, right, all we heard is like, well, you can't get, I don't know, like Fresca, for example, in a can because they have an aluminum shortage, and so they're putting all the Coke in there, and some products just kind of went away that were the lesser used ones, lesser consumed ones, and was like, hey, we need all the aluminum for Coke and Diet Coke and Coke Zero maybe. And some of the smaller brands, we're going to just discontinue them because of that reason. How do they change the packages so quickly? If just not long ago they couldn't get enough aluminum or had trouble getting the packaging, how are they able to flex on this packaging so quickly?
Well, that definitely that is an operational nightmare, honestly, because the UPCs, typically the scanning codes stay the same, but then they just have to change they'll change the weight. But yeah, those configurations, I guess over the decades, they've gotten to be pretty good masters at that. So it takes a little bit of time. But the main thing is that once a product goes out of stock, then they just kind of, as they refill it, it just gradually, this new size starts coming in. So it's never a hard stop or a hard stop. It's just they start filling that pipeline with that smaller package size.
Yeah, because like the tuna can, for example, they just put the StarKist just put more water in it. If it went from 6 ounces to 5 ounces, they just put water, or they have to change the shape of the can.
Well, when it's a small change, they don't have to change the shape of the can. But your cereal box example is a good one, or an ice cream, is that over time that package just continues. The actual cardboard itself becomes smaller and smaller.
Right.
But in those, if you only take out, if you take out 1 or 2 ounces, they're not necessarily going to change the box size. But they can't keep doing that. At some point, they've got to change the box and the bag.
Gotcha. It's called shrinkflation. That's the downsizing of a product without changing its price, and that's what's happening now. Whether it's a Ragu or Powerade was 32 ounces, now 28 ounces. Haagen-Dazs is 14. Some of these are interesting, like Hillshire Farms Polska Kielbasa started at 16, then it was 15, and now it's down to 14 ounces. So it's going to be a cocktail kielbasa pretty soon before you know it. And I think, Lisa, during the course of this discussion, I'd like some credit for not making a joke about your package shrinking.
I appreciate that.
Lisa, all the best to you. Thanks again. Lisa W. Miller, consumer psychology strategist. She's the president of LWM Associates, and they consult businesses on this stuff. Lisa, all the best. Thanks.
Thank you, Scott. Have a good one.
Yeah, you too.